Hey, what's up? Welcome back. In this beginner series on Ruby on Rails, we are building out a blog application, and in today's episode, you'll learn all about comments. So we're going to talk about two different kinds of comments to start. First, we have this kind of Hacker News style comment that is very threaded. So you have a comment and then it can have a reply, and that reply can also have its own reply, and they can be sort of threaded and nested very deeply. And then a separate kind of comment here that we see on the Coding Horror blog at the very bottom here, I would say these are like sort of flat style comments where we have just a comment and then another comment and another comment, and none of them are necessarily replies to previous comments, or if they are, the reply is just sort of like has to reference a previous user. And so what we're going to start with is we will build out this more simple version of comments where we have sort of a flat view of each comment related directly back to a specific post. And then later on, we can add nested comments. So let's jump into the terminal. Here, I'm going to generate a new model. So I'm going to say Rails G model comment. And when we're thinking about a comment, this has a couple of different things. The first thing that we're going to need for a comment is some field in the database to store the text that was typed in for the comment. So we're going to call that content, and that's going to be a text field because we want that to be sort of a blob of text so that someone could write a lot. It doesn't necessarily need to be limited to the size of a string or whatever. The next thing is a comment has to be about a specific post usually. All right, so we're going to say this is going to reference a post, or we're going to build a relationship between a comment and a post. So when we're thinking about the way that we're going to relate two different models, we want to think about sort of the one-to-many or the many-to-many relationship here. And then we also need to think about where that foreign key belongs, right? And so in this case, when we're thinking about a post having many comments or a comment having many posts, just saying it out loud kind of gives you a little bit of intuition about where that foreign key might be. And so in this case, what we're doing is we're going to have it set up so that the foreign key is in the comment model. And the reason we want to do that is because if we stored the data about which comments were on a post, we would need some sort of like array or something in the database that had all of the different IDs for the comments for that post. So instead of having this like array data structure inside of the database, what we're going to do is we're going to rely on the column in the database for the comment, for each comment having reference back to which post that comment is for. And that will create a relationship where we can say that the comment belongs to a post and a post has many comments. Now, similarly, any user who wants to comment on a blog post can do so, and we want to be able to tie that comment back to the author of the comment. So here what we might say is user references. We could say author and set up our foreign key a little differently, but I'm just going to keep it simple and say user. And so we're also going to have a user has many comments. Again, generally, if you think about that, it doesn't really make sense for a comment to have many users necessarily. All right, so let's open up this migration here and take a look. So we've got our content. We should probably make this null false so that folks can't just submit blank comments or empty comments. And then we're creating relationships between the user and the post. Those will both have foreign keys inside of the comments table that point back to the post table and to the users table. And we'll just run this migration, Rails db migrate. The next thing that we want to do is figure out how we want to actually display these comments. And so if we recall, actually, let's fire this thing up. So we'll jump into our blog and say Rails S. And we can head back to the browser here and go to localhost 3000. In the previous episode, we scoped all of the posts to a specific current user. So for now, I go to, let's see, /posts should show me an index of all the posts. So if I create a new post here, this is like testing with some comments, comment on my post, and then we say create a post. So now we have a post. This is the show for the post. So this is what we have for our show page, which really demonstrates, or it doesn't demonstrate anything, it just like shows what the blog post is, right? We have our title and we have like the content of the post. And what is most common is, if you're looking at this blog, for instance, at the very top, you'll have your title, then you'll have all of your content, and then generally at the end, you'll have some list of comments, right? And so here we see how many comments there are, and then all of the comment content below that. So let's go edit this show page. Number one, so that all users can see all posts for the show page. They can't edit them, but they can see them. And number two, so that we can see the comments for the post. So let's go over to our show page here for the post show. So this is the HTML ERB for the route that we were viewing here. Okay, so right after that description, let's add another paragraph tag where we're gonna have our comments. And this is gonna have the same sort of pattern as when we were rendering out the post's description. Now what we could do is we could write all the HTML and everything for the comments directly right here, but what we want to do instead is we're going to make use of something called a partial. A partial is just kind of like another subcomponent of the view that we're going to write in a separate html.erb file. So here we're going to say render at post.comments. And by saying render, this is actually like one of the sort of magical conventional things about Rails is we can call render and pass it a single instance of a active record model, or we can pass it an active record collection. And under the hood, render knows how to find the view that is related to the types of those objects that are being passed in. So in this case, because we're passing in comments, it's going to look for views for rendering comments. And at this time, we don't actually have any comments views. There's no comments controller and there's no comments views. So let's go create a comments controller. So we're going to say Rails G controller comments. By creating the controller this way, we will get a controller class. We'll also get this views directory, and this is really where we want to what we want to edit here. So we'll open this up. Actually, let's just open everything up here and go to app views comments, and we're going to add underscore comment.html.erb. Now the name of this file is actually pretty important. So it has to start with an underscore. That's the convention when we're working with partials, unless we want to like override it and pass in the name of the partial. And then it has to be in this comments directory, and it has to have the html.erb sort of extension here. So if we go back to our posts show, and here at the bottom, when we call render posts for comments, it's going to go through each of the comments that are returned from this active record collection, which actually we haven't defined the association yet either. And that will call this comment, or that will like render this comment view. So for now, let's just say like comment show or comment partial. Okay, so now if we come back over here and we click refresh, it should fail because this comments method doesn't exist on the post. So we'll go into our post model. We need to add another relationship to the post model. So we created a new comment model that's here, comment, and this comment model belongs to a post and belongs to a user. And when we have a belongs to relationship, we can go to the other side of the association. So we can go up here to post and we can say has many comments. Similarly, we can go to the user model and say has many comments because a comment belongs to a user. So now if we were to refresh the page here, we see this new comments thing, and there's no actual comments here yet. So let's actually jump into Rails console and we'll create a comment. So by running Rails C, we can open up the Rails console that allows us to sort of mess around with our data. So here we can say comment.create. Let's see, post is going to be, or post ID is going to be 11, user ID, or user maybe is just like user.last. And then content is going to be our test comment. Okay, so this should create a comment, and it's stored in the database with ID 1. The post that it's related to is post number 11. We know that because in the URL here, this says number 11. And then down here, we see user ID 9. I think user ID 9 is this new user that I'm logged in as. We'll see. So if we refresh the page here, we should see, Okay, so now we see that we're rendering out our comment partial. If we were to create another one here, so test comment number 2, and refresh the page, now we see comment partial is being rendered twice. That's because we're going to see that partial rendered for every single instance of the comments that are returned for this blog post. So again, if we were to say like post.find11, and this is our current post, right? So we're back in the Rails console here, and we have an instance of a post. So because we wrote that association, we can call post.comments, and that gives us back this active record collection with all the comments in it. And the first one says test comment, the second one says test comment number 2. Okay, so we've got our association set up. We've got a couple comments here. What we want to do now is sort of build out maybe an article. I tried to look up, I would try to look up the semantic HTML for the different things that you're building out. And inside this article, we're going to have a p tag that has the content for the comment, comment.content. And if we refresh the page now we actually see the real content for those comments that were being created. So we see the test comment and test comment number 2. That's kind of cool. The other thing we might do is just put like a horizontal reference line in between each of them. So we've got some sort of line. Not pretty, but it's common to see this sort of border situation. Maybe we want to do it with CSS or something different, but I think that's fine for now. Now, another thing that we might want to do is include the author. So if we look back at these posts, right, we see Carlos P, Matthew M, Coding Horror, etc. And then even on Hacker News, right, we see sort of the username and then when they commented right next to the comment. So let's add at least the author down here at the bottom. So I'm going to use a small tag here, and I'm going to say this was by comment.user. So that's going to be the user model, because a comment, recall that a comment belongs to a user. And right now, I think we just have an email address for a user. And so we'll just tack that at the end there. So if we jumped, if we jumped back into user, we would see that they have an email. So if we refresh the page now we see not only the comment, but also who the comment was left by. So let's actually log out and let's log back in. So I'm logged back in as another user here. And if I wanted to go to posts 11 here and view the show page, this is failing because in a previous episode, we scoped all of our posts controller actions to the current user, but we do want to allow other users to see posts. So let's go update our posts controller so that in the show action, we're just allowing access to anyone. So we're just going to say post.all. And this set post thing will not need to happen on the show action. It only needs to happen on, it only needs to happen here. So we'll refresh the page, and now we have access to posts. Undefined method title for active record relation. This should not be post.all. It should be find params ID. Okay. All right, great. So now we're able to see posts that were made by other users. So we're logged in as CJAV dev, but the original post was written by cjavil@gmail.com. And so that's cool that we can see those other comments, we can see the post, but if we wanted to make our own post, our own comment, we don't have access to the Rails console, so how would we go about doing that? I think it makes sense to add a form, right? Maybe at the bottom of our comments section where we can add an input that will allow users to enter their own comments. So back in the post show, again, we technically could render, we could write all of the HTML right here for our form to accept a comment directly right here. But instead what we can do is we can again use a partial that is the form for a comment. So here we can say render, I think it's render partial, and then we're going to say comments form. And we'll come back here in just a second. So then in our comments, we're going to add a underscore form.html.arb, and this is going to be our form. Now, before I run away too fast, these look different, right? So the first one, we're able to use render and then just pass in this active record collection with the underlying objects. When we say render partial, we need to specify the actual sort of view slug, or I don't know what this is actually called. It's just kind of what is the controller's name / and then the partial name. And that's because if we just said render like this, if we just said render form, it's going to try to look at the posts form, not the comments form. And because we're in the posts show page, we need to tell it how to go like sort of up and over to a sibling directory, a view for a sibling. So we're going to say render partial. We'll go back into our form here for comments, and we're going to add a new form. And the controller action here, we want to send a post request to a specific route. Now let's talk about this route for a second. So like technically we could do /comments, right? We could create our comments controller to receive a post request at the top level, and we would expect that we are being passed the ID of the post and perhaps the content, and then we can look up the current user by who's logged in. An alternative is to nest the route underneath posts. So let's talk about that for a second. So if we go to routes here, right now we have resources posts, and okay, so resources posts gives us all of these top 7 routes for all these posts things. But what we can do is we can actually nest it so that instead of having a top level /comments, we can have /posts/ID/comments. So we're going to nest that resource inside. And the way that we do that with routes is we say we pass a block to the resources method. So resources here is just a method. This is called a domain specific language, the routing stuff that we have in Rails. But this resources is a method that could be defined to accept several different arguments, one of which, again, is a block. And inside of that block, we can sort of recursively continue using this domain-specific language to define the routes. So here we can say resources comments. And in this case, we really only want create, at least to start. And by doing this, let's take a look at what happens with our routes. So if we refresh the page here, you'll notice that we have this new post comments path that has post/post_id/comments. And this is going to give us, well, it's only accepts post requests. So it will receive a post request to this route, and it will create, we expect by convention, it will create a comment that is related to this specific post. So that's kind of the convention when we're using these nested routes. All right, so let's head back over here. Actually, we'll copy this comments path because this is what we want to use as our action, is our post comment path. Now, when we're using this post comments path, if it has a dynamic segment or something here that starts with a colon as part of the path, that's not optional. So this one's optional because it has parens. Because this is not optional, we have to pass something as an argument into this method. And the argument should be a post, and the method will know to pull off its ID. So here we're going to say post. Now we have to go through one more concept, and that is when we're rendering a partial, in order for the partial to know which post we're talking about when we're passing it in there, we generally will pass another argument here called locals. And this is going to be the local variables that we want to be defined inside of that partial when it's running. So we could say post is @post. You could also technically use the instance variable @post here. It's not a good convention. It's better to like explicitly pass in these objects as local variables to your partials so that you can render these partials in a bunch of different places. So we've got a post that's coming in. This is going to be able to create a new post or new comment that's related to this post. We also need to have some sort of like text area to accept the content. And the name for this text area is going to be comment content. So at the top level params that we're passing in, we're going to have a hash called comment. And inside of that hash, we will have a value or a key content that points at a value. And that is like the content that was typed in. And we're going to make this maybe 6 rows and I don't know, 20 columns. Comment text boxes are usually pretty small so that people don't get mouthy. I don't know. Posts/11 here. All right, so undefined method render partial. Did I spell that wrong? Is it not render? Is it render partial like this? Let's see. Render partial. There we go. Sorry. So this is render again, and then it's not underscore partial. It is a method that accepts a hash, and if you pass it partial with a key, or the path to the partial should work. All right, so we see the form here. If we right click and we inspect, we'll see that our path or our action for our form is indeed post/11/comments. So we're going to send a post request. We're passing along our authenticity token to prevent CSRF attacks. We're going to pass on any content that we type in here. This is my content. And we are going to send this as a post request to this route. Now this route is going to map to the controller, the comments controller. I thought we would see it here. Oh, here it is. So if we scroll over to the right, we can see that this is going to the comments controller's create action, which we haven't defined yet. So let's go do that also. So comments controller create action. And inside of here, what we want to do is we want to create a new comment for the post from the current user. So how can we do this? Well, in previous episodes, we talked about creating a comment or creating an object by saying @comment equals current user.comments.new. This is called, again, building through association. So we're building through this comments association here. And again, we're going to have our private comment params, and we're going to require the comment be at the top level, because again, we have this top level hash here, comment, and then we want to permit the content. Okay, so then we're going to permit this content to be passed when we're initializing this new instance of a comment through this comments association. Now, at this point, the comment will know its content that was passed in from the front end, and it will know the ID of the current user. So it'll be able to set the user ID and it'll be able to set the content. However, we have not actually set the post anywhere. And so it turns out that the post ID, again, if we go back to this view here, recall that this thing that starts with a colon will be available in params at params:post ID. So the value that's being passed in here, again, is going to be the ID of the post. That's number 11. We want to merge the params that we're passing in here so that it contains the post ID, params:post ID. Okay, so this is a long chain here, but this is what we're doing. So these first 3 lines here are just pulling out the content and permitting it so that it's allowed. The last line is explicitly merging that post ID from post params at the top level, so that when we create our new comment, we're passing in the content and the post ID. And because we're building through association, we're going to have the user ID, and that's all that we need for creating our comment. So now here at the top, we can say, if we don't save, so then we want to say flash notice is going to be the comment.errors.full messages.toSentence, I believe. And if we are able to successfully save the comment, then we want to redirect to the post path for params post ID. We could also just say redirect to, I think, @comment.post. But this one is a little safer. Yeah, if for some reason we don't have a post, this is fine. Okay, so let's go back. So let's go back over here. We're going to refresh the page and we're going to test this out. So we're going to say, this is another test comment, and hit submit. All right, look at that. It's already showing up here. That's fantastic. So if we close that, testing, 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 we've got a bunch of comments here and they're all showing up. Now, a couple things. They're showing up at the bottom. So chronologically, we're seeing the oldest comment at the top. So let's go back to our comment or our post show here. And what we could do is say we want these to be ordered in reverse. And we can say order ID descending. We'll come back over here, refresh our page. And now the newest comment should be at the top. Is this the newest? And that is at the top. So now we're seeing them in reverse chronological order. This is super cool. but we have a small problem. We have a performance issue. So if there were hundreds and hundreds of comments, we've got a couple of performance issues here. One of them is called an n+1 query. The other one is that we're not actually caching the current user. So every time we see current user being called inside of our controller action, there's a couple of them here. We're firing off requests to query the current user. And so there's a couple different performance issues here. So we're going to clean those up in the next episode. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.